In a world that often demands justice, sometimes the most powerful choice you can make is mercy. Explore the complex stories of forgiveness and the incredible strength it takes to let go of the past. Subscribe now to experience these deeply moving human dramas.
I didn't go to the hospital that morning, and I've never forgiven myself for that. I'm 64 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house in Greensboro, North Carolina, the same house I've lived in for 31 years. My husband passed in 2017. My son, my youngest, lives 3 hours away and calls me every Sunday. And my daughter, well, that's the story I need to tell you. Her name is Melissa. She was my firstborn. I named her after a song I loved when I was young, something soft and hopeful. She came into this world on a Tuesday morning in April, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is what I was made for. She grew up headstrong. Always knew what she wanted. In high school, she ran track, made the honor roll, never gave me much trouble. I was proud of her. I told her every chance I got. When she left for college in Raleigh, I cried for a week, but they were good tears. The kind that come when you've done something right. She met him during her junior year. His name was Daryl, not the Darnell on that list you might have seen. A different man entirely. Daryl with an A. He was tall, confident, the kind of man who walks into a room and assumes it belongs to him. I didn't trust him from the first handshake, but I kept my mouth shut. My own mother had kept her mouth shut about my choices, and I'd always appreciated it. I tried to extend the same courtesy. They got married young. Too young, I thought, 23 and 25. I threw them a beautiful reception in my backyard. String lights, peach roses. My sister made her famous pound cake. Melissa looked gorgeous. I danced until my feet hurt. She got pregnant 8 months after the wedding. I drove to Raleigh every other weekend. I painted the nursery a warm yellow. I bought more baby clothes than one child could ever wear. I was so happy I didn't even notice how quiet Melissa had gotten. My grandson was born in November. She named him Isaac Renard Bennett. And from the very first hour, I knew something about him was different. Not wrong. I want to be clear about that. Different. He looked at the lights in the hospital room with such focus it startled the nurse. He didn't cry much. He watched, observed. Like he was already studying the world and filing it away somewhere. The pediatrician flagged some developmental delays at 18 months. Melissa called me, and I could hear in her voice that she was already pulling away from it. Already putting distance between herself and what the doctor had said. He's just slow, she told me. All kids develop differently. I agreed with her because I didn't know what else to say. Because I wanted her to be right. By the time Isaac was 3, the diagnosis was clear. Autism spectrum disorder. The developmental pediatrician was kind. She used gentle words, gave us pamphlets, pointed us toward resources. I sat in that office holding Isaac's little hand while he traced the pattern on the chair cushion with one finger, over and over, and I thought, this child is going to be fine. Whatever fine looks like, he's going to get there. Melissa didn't take it the same way. I don't know exactly when she started disappearing. It happened slowly, the way water damage works. You don't see it until the ceiling caves in. She stopped calling as often. When I visited, she was there in body, but somewhere else entirely. Daryl had started traveling for work, or so he said. Isaac would reach for her, and she'd pick him up but hold him at arm's length, like she was afraid of him. Like she didn't know how to be his mother. Isaac was 4 years old when Melissa dropped him off at my house on a Friday afternoon and didn't come back. She'd packed a bag. 3 days of clothes, his stuffed elephant he called Ellie, his special cup, the one with no lip that he needed because regular cups bothered him. She carried him inside, set him on the couch, kissed him on the top of his head. He didn't look up. He was already lining up my coaster set in order of size on the coffee table. She looked at me and said, "Mama, I just need a few days." That was the last time Isaac lived in her house. I called her after 3 days. She said she needed another week. I called after the week. She said she wasn't in a good place. I called after that, and Daryl answered and told me she'd moved out, that they were separating, and that Isaac was better off with you for now. He said for now like it meant something, like it had an expiration date. It didn't. I was 51 years old with a retirement job at the school district doing administrative work, a fixed income, a mortgage, and suddenly I was raising a 4-year-old with autism. Full-time, alone. I won't sugarcoat those first 2 years. They were hard in a way I didn't have vocabulary for. Isaac had routines that couldn't be broken without a meltdown that would last an hour. Certain sounds sent him under the table. He couldn't tolerate the texture of most foods, so I learned to cook around his specific list. Plain rice, chicken with no seasoning, Apple slices cut exactly the same size. Crackers from one specific brand because a different brand felt different in his mouth and he'd spit them out. I learned all of this by trial and error, by watching him, by reading every book the library had, by calling the autism resource line so many times they started recognizing my voice. I also started seeing what Isaac could do. He was 5 when I first realized he was memorizing the TV guide. Not because anyone taught him. I don't even think he understood what a TV guide was for. But because the grid of it, the structure, the repeating pattern of time slots and channel numbers, that spoke something to him that nothing else did. He'd sit with it for an hour and then close it, and recite every show that aired on Channel 4 from 6 in the morning to midnight without missing one. His special education teacher, Ms. Harmon, pulled me aside one afternoon when he was in first grade. She said, "Mrs. Bennett, I need you to understand something. Isaac is not behind. Isaac is processing the world in a way we don't have good tools to measure yet. He's the most pattern-intelligent student I've had in 20 years." I drove home and cried in the car for 15 minutes, the good kind of tears. Melissa called maybe twice a year, birthday and Christmas, sometimes just Christmas. Isaac never ran to the phone. He'd listen, say okay a few times, hand the phone back to me. I don't know if that was because he didn't feel much, or because he felt so much he'd learned to build a wall. I never pushed him on it. I figured that was between him and God and his own heart to work out when he was ready. When Isaac was 9, he got his first laptop. I bought it, refurbished for $80 from a man in our church who repaired computers. Isaac sat down with it, and within 40 minutes had figured out how to access the programming tutorials that came preloaded. I didn't even know they were on there. He started coding that year, self-taught, the way he learned everything, obsessively, systematically, in a way that normal education could never contain. By 10, he was building simple games. By 11, he was in online forums talking to adult developers. And none of them knew he was a child because he wrote with a precision that didn't read like a kid. I didn't fully understand what he was building at 12. I understood that it involved a calendar system and color coding and something about task sequencing. He tried to explain it to me several times. What I understood was that he'd gotten frustrated by the way existing productivity apps were designed. He said they were built for neurotypical brains and left everyone else guessing. And he wanted to build something that worked the way his brain worked. He worked on it for 3 years. I bought him better equipment when I could. When I couldn't, I took on weekend work babysitting for neighbors. I didn't tell him that. He never needed to carry that. When he was 15, he entered it in a national student technology competition. He didn't tell me until 2 days before the deadline because he said he didn't want me to be disappointed if he didn't place. He placed first. The prize was a mentorship program with a tech accelerator out of Charlotte. They took one look at what he'd built and told him it wasn't a school project. It was a product, a real one. They helped him incorporate, guided him through a licensing deal, connected him with developers who could build out the infrastructure he'd designed. He turned 17 in the middle of all of it. I made him a lemon cake, and he ate 2 slices and went back to his laptop. The licensing deal closed just after his 18th birthday. $2.8 million. I sat at our kitchen table when he told me, and I didn't say anything for a long time. He sat across from me, calm as still water, watching me the way he always watched things carefully, like he was making sure he understood what he was seeing. "Grandma," he said, "are you okay?" I said, "Baby, I'm more than okay." He nodded. He got up and poured us both a glass of sweet tea and sat back down. That was Isaac's version of a celebration. The news traveled the way news always travels in family. I didn't announce it. I mentioned it to my sister when she called, and from there it moved through the family like weather. I don't know exactly how Melissa found out, but she did. She called on a Tuesday evening in late October. I hadn't heard her voice in almost 2 years. She said she'd been thinking about Isaac a lot. She said she'd been going through some things, doing some work on herself. She said she realized she'd missed so much and she wanted to make it right. She asked if she could come visit. I told her I'd talk to Isaac. I sat with him that night after dinner. I told him his mother had called. He was quiet for a moment, then he asked what she wanted. I said she wanted to visit. He looked at the table for a while. Then he said, "Okay, but I'm not going to pretend." I told him he didn't have to pretend anything. She came the following Saturday. She looked different, older, thinner, dressed carefully like she was going to a job interview. She hugged me at the door and I let her. She walked into the living room where Isaac was sitting with his laptop, and he looked up and he said, Hey. She started crying almost immediately. She said she was sorry. She said she'd been so scared and so broken, and she hadn't known how to be what he needed. She said she'd thought he'd be better without her. She said a lot of things. Isaac listened. He didn't fill the silence. He didn't offer comfort. He just listened, and when she was done, he said, "I know." That was all. But the way he said it, not cold, not angry, just clear, it told me he'd already processed this. He'd done that work privately, the way he did everything, and he'd arrived somewhere she was still trying to reach. The visit seemed to go okay. She stayed for 3 hours, had lunch, helped me in the kitchen. When she left, she hugged Isaac and he let her, and that felt like progress. She came back the next weekend, and the one after that. I don't know exactly when it changed. Maybe it was always going to change. Maybe I was naive to think she'd really come back just to make things right. It was my sister who told me. She'd run into one of Melissa's college friends who'd mentioned, almost in passing, that Melissa had hired an attorney. Not a family counselor, not a mediator, an attorney. I called Melissa that night and I asked her directly. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said she just wanted to make sure things were handled fairly, that she was still his legal parent, that she had rights she needed to protect. I asked her what rights she felt she needed to protect. She didn't answer that directly. She talked around it. She said she wasn't trying to cause problems. She said she loved Isaac. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen for 10 minutes just breathing. The letter from the attorney arrived 9 days later. It was framed politely, full of legal language I had to read 3 times to understand. The essence of it was this. Melissa was asserting her parental rights over Isaac, now 18, and was requesting access to documentation regarding his financial holdings, and was indicating potential legal action regarding oversight of assets she believed may have been accumulated during his minor years while in my care. She wasn't coming back for her son. She was coming back for his money. I called a legal aid office and they referred me to an attorney named Mr. Holloway. He was 60 years old, patient, spoke plainly. I sat across from him with the letter and he read it twice and he told me the truth. Isaac was 18 now, legally an adult, so parental rights weren't really the framework. What her attorney was likely exploring, he said, was whether she could make any claim related to the years he was a minor, whether my custody had been formal or informal, whether any of his development had been financially supported in ways she might attach to. It was thin, he said, but not impossible. I called Isaac that night. He'd moved into a small apartment near the university by then, though he came home most Sundays. I told him what had happened. I told him what the attorney said. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Grandma, did you keep records?" I told him I'd kept everything. Every IEP document, every school report, every medical bill, every receipt. I had 3 binders and 2 shoeboxes going back to when he was 4 years old. I don't even know why I kept it all. It wasn't strategic, it was just my nature. I kept things, I documented. I wrote the date on everything. He was quiet again. Then he said, "Good, let me make a few calls." I didn't know at the time what those calls were. I found out later that he'd spoken to the accelerator, to the attorneys who'd handled his licensing deal, to a documentation specialist. He'd spent 3 evenings building a timeline, not just of his work but of everything. Every version of the app going back to the first file he'd created at age 12. Every online forum post. Every mentor email. A complete, time-stamped, verified record of his work and its origin. And then there was something else he'd done that I didn't know about until we were in the room together. Mr. Holloway had advised that the best path was a clear counterfiling, establishing Isaac's autonomous ownership of his work and a formal accounting of the custody arrangement. We prepared everything. We were ready. The meeting happened in late January. It was not a courtroom. It was a conference room at her attorney's office. Melissa sat across from us with a man in a dark suit who spoke in the smooth, practiced way of someone who'd made a career of making unfair things sound reasonable. He began presenting his framework. He talked about parental investment, about the formative years, about contributions Melissa had made. I looked at my grandson sitting next to me. He was calm. His hands were flat on the table. He was watching the other attorney the way he'd watched things his whole life. Carefully, precisely, storing everything. The other attorney kept talking. At some point, I felt Mr. Holloway shift beside me, and I realized he was about to speak. But Isaac put one hand gently on the table between us. Not dramatic, just a small, quiet gesture, and he said, almost to himself, "Let him finish." He let him finish. Then Isaac opened a folder and he began to speak. He spoke quietly and without emotion the way he always did, But what he said was so specific, so precise, so layered with dates and documents and evidence that the other attorney stopped writing after the first 2 minutes. Isaac walked through his complete timeline. He addressed every claim directly. When the other attorney tried to interject, Isaac paused, listened, and then addressed the interjection with documentation. At one point, he placed a photograph on the table. It was dated, a printout from his earliest coding files, showing the first version of the app framework, time-stamped November 14th, his 12th birthday, 3 days after I'd given him that refurbished laptop. He said, "This predates any involvement my mother has had in my life by 6 years." The other attorney looked at Melissa. Melissa looked at Isaac. Isaac looked at the table. The meeting ended 40 minutes later. The attorney's posture had changed by then. He collected his papers carefully and said they would be in touch. They were in touch 10 days later with a letter withdrawing the claim. I didn't go to my daughter's wedding. I didn't go to the hospital the morning Isaac was born because I'd had a bad cold and was afraid of passing it to a newborn. Those are 2 things I carry. But I was in that room in January. I was sitting next to my grandson when he protected himself and protected me, and protected everything we'd built together across 14 years of Tuesday mornings and Sunday dinners and lemon cakes and lined-up coasters and refurbished laptops and every quiet, ordinary, extraordinary day. After the meeting, we walked to the parking lot. It was cold. Isaac had his hands in his jacket pockets. We stood by my car for a minute without saying anything. Then I said, "How did you know what to prepare?" He looked at me the way he had across that kitchen table. Careful, clear. He said, "You kept everything, Grandma. I just organized it." I put my arms around him and held on for a while. He patted my back twice the way he did, not because he didn't feel it, but because that was his way of saying he did. We went to lunch at the diner we'd been going to since he was 5. He ordered the same thing he always ordered. I ordered pie. We sat for 2 hours and talked about his next project and whether I needed new gutters on the house and a documentary he'd been watching about deep-sea navigation systems. Normal. Ordinary. I drove home and walked inside and stood in my kitchen for a while, looking at the 3 binders on the shelf. I'd kept them because that's who I am. Because my mother kept things, and her mother before her. Because I believed, somewhere under the exhaustion and the fear and the years of figuring it out one day at a time, that records matter. That what you do for someone matters. That you should be able to show your work. I never imagined I'd need to. I'm glad I did. Isaac calls me every Sunday now. Same as my last Sunday, he told me he'd hired a small team, and they were working on a second product. He said it was for people who think in systems. He said, "You'd probably use it, Grandma. It's for people who like to keep track of things." I laughed. He didn't laugh, but there was something in his voice. I know what it was. It was his version of saying thank you.